Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is right around the corner from release, and in just about 2 weeks we'll finally have the answers we've been waiting for since the end of Remake. But as we get closer to the release of the game, we also have a bunch of news regarding what we could really expect from Rebirth going forward. On the topic of its story, characters, and even game design choices, there is plenty to go over. So of course, with this comes potential spoilers. So if you don't want to know anything about the game at all, please do not hesitate to click off the video now. Otherwise, the first thing to go over here comes from Shinra Archaeology Department at Shinra Art, and it reads here: if Final Fantasy VII Rebirth will include any content that will surprise even OG veterans. Creative director Nomura responds that he can't go into detail without giving hints, but yes. He thinks that aside from its ending, part 1 unfolded in a way that OG players could predict. He says that the third and final part of the remake will also develop in a way as to wrap up the story as a whole. In this sense, it is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth that will serve as the climax of the story, which I've always been of the mindset that Rebirth will be the most important game in the trilogy. And what Nomura is saying here really just enforces that. The scenes and iconic moments that Rebirth pretty much has to adapt, I think, is crucial to the trilogy as a whole. Moreover, we'll have extra surprises and scenes none of us are expecting, which only add to the high expectations people already have. We all know the climax Nomura is mentioning here, that being the Forgotten Capital, and arguably the most iconic scene in gaming history. It's not really a question of whether they can adapt it perfectly, because Rebirth is already going to have surprises that stray from the original game. One example that can attest to that is Zack. The question then remains, what exactly is Zack's role in this story? One thing that is abundantly clear is that Zack will play a part that will drastically change the outcome of events leading up to the final part. And in that sense, Rebirth is constructing itself as its own game, no longer tied down to the original, trying to adapt everything perfectly, but trying to become something more, something better, hence the title of the game. And speaking of story changes, the producer Yoshinori Kitase also touched on fan expectations and their own desire in not wanting to squander the OG story. That even within the development team, there was some expectations that Remake's ending would cause controversy, with much player speculation and opinions. To a certain degree, things are proceeding just as intended in this regard. However, he assures players that the remake project is based around respecting the original story, not destroying it. Therefore, they plan to develop the story by rearranging important elements like Zack's death in a way that respects the OG, but creates a sense of freshness. And this pretty much goes back to what I was saying earlier. This trilogy is really just a way to add on to what made the original so great. Although to no surprise, the FF fandom was split over these changes, as usual. However, I think the dev team realized that if they wanted Final Fantasy VII to leave another legacy, to grow even larger than itself, they would need to create something fresh, an experience both old and new fans could be excited about every entry. And you can't very well do that if you create the same game twice. But being thrust into the unknown once again like it was our first time playing is admittedly a bold and exciting move. They don't necessarily want to make a whole new story that totally just disregards the source material, but to create a story that goes beyond that, to make an experience that transcends the original and lives on for many more years as its own thing. Now, this thing I want to touch on is something I have been wanting in JRPGs for years, and that's being able to create a party without the main character. I feel like this has been an option long overdue at this point. So of course, Rebirth's director Hamaguchi says that after unlocking chapter selection, players can replay chapters without Cloud in their team, allowing them to control other characters as the lead party member. Too many times have there been RPGs that have more than a handful of characters to choose from, but instead of allowing us to have full control of those party members, we would need to have the main character in the party at all times. games. And while the reason is clear as to why that's the case, I think options are always preferred. Although we won't be able to have that option on the first playthrough, at least it'll be there for people who want to bring out the most in the game's combat. That means having a squad like Yuffie, Tifa, and Aerith are just possible now. Honestly, it's really something I wish was standard for more RPGs in general. And while we're on the topic of party members, we also know at this point that both Vincent and Sid are unplayable in Rebirth. However, instead there'll be NPCs that you can talk to for quests and other such tasks around the world. I've seen many people upset about this, but I honestly think this is fine. Rebirth already has 7 main characters within the game that you can choose from, all with different skills and abilities that we can level up and use. Not only these characters, but you can also count in 8 characters in total when you realize that Sephiroth is also a playable character. And before you go and say, well, that's just the demo, right? Do we really think they'd make Sephiroth's movesets and abilities as in-depth as the recurring characters if they weren't going to use them more? They could have easily just made Sephiroth's moveset spam attack and let it be that. But for some reason they chose to go all out. I wonder why. With that said, I think with all the characters and content that we get here, Vincent and Sid not being playable is honestly fine with me. All of that really just leaves more anticipation to be had once the third and final part is released. This next section I found interesting is how Hamaguchi points out some Western games that had a big influence on Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. That being The Witcher 3, Horizon Zero Dawn, and Ghost of Tsushima. And from what we've seen of the game thus far, this all seems very accurate. You can already see the influence everywhere, from how you climb rocks and ledges like you would pretty much do all the time in Horizon. Perhaps the Witcher influence comes from how great the questing was in that game, and hopefully that translates to Rebirth as well, with how beautiful the world looks when exploring the plains near Calm or other areas of the world such as Costa del Sol or Cosmo Canyon. It really feels like they took a lot of inspiration from the richness of Ghost of Tsushima's open world. I really love the fact that the devs aren't afraid to just say what games in the industry influenced their work. I know when many see that devs are influenced by other games or media, that means that they're trying to copy said thing or devalue their project for relying on these influences. But I don't think devs are in the wrong here. In fact, I think in recent years, Final Fantasy looking to Western media for influence has only given better games as a result. Problems notwithstanding, both Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy XVI gave us exceptional experiences for not only listening to feedback from past games, but by looking to other pieces of media to fully realize their game. Honestly speaking, from a game design and gameplay standpoint, 7 Rebirth is really shaping up to be one of the best modern Final Fantasies ever released, maybe even the best. When you look at the problems Final Fantasy has faced in the past up until now, the main constant between all of them is pacing issues. There was never really a good balance to be had with any of the modern Final Fantasy games, as it was either you had one good thing about the game, but then something else would just hold it back from being an amazing experience all around. However, with Rebirth, it seems like the design issues littered around every other Final Fantasies may have been answered with this entry. Things like questing and exploring all seem more engaging, especially in comparison to Remake. So now, with release so close at this point, I really wonder what other mysteries are yet to be revealed. How do we feel about the improvements regarding the game design? And what role will Zack have for Rebirth? All of that and more are soon to be revealed in just a couple weeks from now.